The rhythm of the rain was a constant, hollow thud against the mud brick walls. Ali stood in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on a dark, growing stain spreading across the ceiling. A drop hit the floor with a sharp splash. Then another. The water tracked a jagged path down the wall, turning the dried earth into slick, gray sludge. He moved quickly, reaching for the edge of the thin blanket draped over his father. The fabric was damp to the touch, heavy with trapped moisture. He dragged the bedding away from the drip, his knuckles white as he pulled the weight across the uneven floorboards. The roof groaned under the pressure of the storm, a low, splintering sound. Outside, the marketplace was silent. He looked at the walls, where deep fissures ran like lightning bolts. Every corner of the room held the weight of their exhaustion. He tucked the blanket tightly around his father, listening to the labored breath. The leak continued, a steady, rhythmic ticking. The door creaked open, admitting a gust of wind that stirred the dust on the floor. His mother stepped inside, her movements slow and heavy. She dropped a small bundle of grain on the table, her hands raw, the skin split and stained deep with the color of the fields. She reached into the folds of her wrap and produced a single, crusty piece of bread. It was small, barely enough to silence a stomach for an hour. She broke it, pressing the larger portion into Ali's palm. He looked at the bread, then at his father, who lay still, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rattling gasps. Ali did not hesitate. He stood, walked to the bedside, and pressed the bread into his father's thin, trembling fingers. His father tried to push it back, a weak protest, but Ali held his hands steady until the older man's grip tightened around the crust. Ali turned away before his mother could speak. He stepped out into the cold night air, the silence of the village pressing against his ears. He did not look back at the flickering light of the hut. His jaw set, he began to walk, his mind already fixed on the market square and the long day waiting for him at dawn. The sun was a thin, pale line on the horizon when Ali hoisted the wooden crate onto his shoulder. The wood was rough, splintered, and bit into his shoulder with every step. He began the 6-kilometer trek toward the market. The road was not paved. It was a jagged ribbon of packed earth and loose, sharp gravel. Each step was a deliberate calculation. He kept his eyes on the ground, watching for the larger stones that threatened to tear his skin. His feet were tough, mapped with thick calluses. But the gravel was relentless. It pressed into his arches and scraped against his heels. He walked with a steady, rhythmic gait. Halfway through the journey, the crate shifted. He stopped, his breath hitching, and adjusted his grip. His arms ached. He shifted the crate to his other shoulder, feeling the raw friction where the wood had already begun to chafe. He did not stop to rest. The market square loomed ahead, a distant cluster of stalls. He pushed forward, his focus narrowed to the next 10 feet of road. Ali reached the square, just as the sun climbed high, turning the air into a shimmering haze of heat. He dropped the crate onto the dusty ground and began arranging the bruised apples, turning the best sides toward the passing crowd. The market was a wall of sound, merchants barking, carts clattering, and the constant hum of bartering. Ali took his place, his throat already dry from the long walk. He opened his mouth to call out, but only a raspy whisper emerged. He swallowed hard, trying to clear the grit from his lungs. He took a deep breath and shouted, his voice ringing out above the noise. He shouted again, louder, his throat burning with every syllable. By noon, the sun was relentless. His legs trembled, the muscles twitching under the strain of standing for hours on the uneven ground. He felt a sharp, stinging pain in his neck as he pushed his voice to its limit. His voice cracked, a jagged sound that died in the dry air. He did not stop. He wiped the sweat from his brow, planted his feet firmly in the dirt, and called out the prices once more. When the midday rush slowed to a trickle, Ali retreated to the shadow of a crumbling stone wall. His hands were stained with the juice of bruised fruit and the fine gray dust of the square. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dog-eared notebook. The paper was thin and yellowed, held together by a frayed piece of twine. He opened it carefully, shielding the pages from the wind. His fingers traced the lines of scribbled math problems, the ink faded but still legible. He checked his work, calculating the profit margins of his apples against the rising cost of grain. He moved to the next page, where he had copied English words overheard from passing travelers. He whispered them under his breath, testing the shapes of the sounds against his tongue. "Market," he murmured, then "ledger" and "negotiate." He repeated them until the syllables felt less foreign. A customer approached. and Ali snapped the notebook shut, tucking it deep into his pocket. He stood up, his joints stiff, and returned to his stall with a practiced, neutral expression. But his mind remained on the pages. He was not just selling apples, he was memorizing the mechanics of a world that existed far beyond the market gates. The afternoon air grew heavy and still. Ali was busy stacking the last of his apples when the rhythm of the market shifted. A shadow fell across his stall, blocking the sun. He looked up, expecting a customer, but saw only a group of older boys standing in a tight, jagged line. They did not speak. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that cut through the noise of the square. Before Ali could retreat, the largest of them lunged forward. A heavy hand slammed into Ali's shoulder, sending him reeling backward. He hit the ground hard, his palms scraping against the sharp, uneven earth. The wooden crate tipped and collapsed, spilling the bruised apples across the mud. They rolled into the filth, crushed under the boots of the boys as they stepped closer. Ali tried to scramble upright, but another shove sent him sprawling back into the dirt. The air was filled with the sound of splintering wood and the mocking laughter of the group. He looked up from the ground, his vision blurred by the sudden shock of the assault. The apples were scattered, his stall was ruined, and the space he had occupied for hours was now a sight of chaos. He remained on the ground, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Ali pushed himself up, his fingers digging into the wet earth to find purchase. His first instinct was to check the pouch tucked securely against his side. He reached down, but his hand met only the rough fabric of his trousers. The space was flat, empty. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs as he frantically patted his pockets, then the ground around him. Nothing. He looked up, his eyes scanning the shifting legs of the marketplace crowd. He saw the boys, their backs turned, weaving through the throng with a familiar, hurried gait. They were already 20 yards away, disappearing into the dense press of people. He tried to stand, but his legs felt hollow, drained of their strength. He watched the last of them vanish behind a merchant's cart. The coins were gone. The medicine for his father, the small portion of bread for his mother, the weeks of labor, all of it had been taken in a single, brutal moment. He sank back into the dust, his chest heaving with the weight of the silence that followed. The market noise continued around him, indifferent and loud, but he heard none of it. He stared at his empty, mud-stained palms, his fingers trembling. The reality of the coming night settled over him, colder and sharper than the winter air. He had nothing left to take home. The grit of the marketplace floor pressed into his skin, a constant reminder of his failure. Ali stared at the horizon, his breath hitching as the image of his father's empty medicine bottle flashed in his mind. He saw his mother's tired face, the way she saved the smallest crust of bread for him, and the weight of that sacrifice burned hotter than the shame of the theft. He could not return to that room with empty hands. He would not let them starve. Ali forced his muscles to obey, pushing his palms into the dirt to lever himself upright. He wiped the thick, wet mud from his face with the back of his hand, smearing the grime but clearing his vision. He stood, his knees shaking, and brushed the dust from his legs with sharp, rhythmic strikes. The market was a trap, a cycle of hunger he had been forced to endure for too long. He turned his back on the square, his gaze hardening, as he looked toward the distant, shimmering lights of the wealthy district. He did not know what he would find there, but he knew he could not stay here. He took a step, then another, his pace quickening as the distance between him and his old life grew. He walked with a heavy, steady stride, his jaw set. The streets of the wealthy district were paved with smooth, dark stone that reflected the dim glow of street lamps. Ali walked slowly, his eyes scanning the ground, searching for anything that might bridge the gap between his hunger and his family's survival. Near a stone fountain, a dark shape caught the light. He stopped, his gaze locking onto a leather wallet wedged firmly between two cobblestones. He knelt, his fingers brushing the cool, polished surface of the leather. It felt heavy, far heavier than a simple pouch of coins. He pulled it free, the leather soft and worn under his touch. His heart thudded against his ribs as he turned the object over. He pried the flap open, his breath hitching in his throat. Inside, thick stacks of bills were packed tight, layer upon layer of paper. He fanned the edges, the crisp sound of the notes echoing in the quiet street. It was enough to feed his village for a year. He stood there, motionless, the weight of the wallet pulling his hand toward the ground, while the gravity of the choice pulled at his very soul. His fingers trembled against the leather, the texture rough and real against his callous skin. He pulled a single bill from the stack, watching the light catch the ink. This paper could stop his father's coughing. It could buy the medicine that sat out of reach in the village pharmacy. It could fill the empty bowls that haunted his mother's kitchen every single night. He could disappear with this. He could run into the shadows of the city and never look back at the mud-walled home that offered him nothing but hunger. The temptation surged through him, a sharp, cold ache that made his stomach twist. He looked at the fountain, the water splashing rhythmically against the stone, indifferent to his struggle. He thought of his father's hands, worn thin by years of labor, and the way his mother bowed her head in prayer over a handful of dry grain. If he took this, he would be no better than the boys who had shoved him into the dirt. He would be a thief, just like them. He squeezed his eyes shut, took a long, ragged breath, and forced his fingers to fold the flap back into place. The decision was made. Ali walked with purpose, his pace steady despite the ache in his legs. He navigated the grid of the wealthy district, checking the address on the ID card against the brass numbers mounted on stone pillars. He reached a heavy oak door, its surface polished to a dark, mirror-like sheen. He stood before it, his hand hovering over the iron knocker. He exhaled, a sharp puff of air in the cool night, and let the metal fall. The sound echoed, heavy and final. A moment later, the door swung inward. A man stood in the frame, the warm light from the foyer spilling out to illuminate the street. Ali did not speak. He simply held out the leather wallet, his arm extended, his palm steady. The man looked at the object, then shifted his gaze to Ali. He looked at the dirt-streaked skin, the calloused knuckles, and the exhaustion etched into the lines around Ali's eyes. The man took the wallet, his fingers brushing against Ali's, but he did not pull away. He remained frozen, his eyes wide, scanning the contents of the wallet before looking back at the boy. The man stepped back, clearing the threshold. He gestured toward a chair positioned near a low table. Ali hesitated, his feet heavy with the dust of the market, then stepped inside. The room smelled of old paper and polished wood. The man placed the wallet on the table, the leather making a soft thud against the surface. He looked at Ali, his expression shifting from shock to a steady, searching gaze. He pulled the chair out, the legs scraping against the floorboards. "Sit," he said. Ali sat, his hands resting on his knees. The man leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He did not ask about the money. He asked about the notebook Ali pulled from his pocket. The man listened, his eyes tracking the movement of Ali's hands as he explained his daily routine. Then, the man spoke. He offered Ali a position as an assistant, starting the next morning. The words hung in the air, simple and transformative. Ali looked at the man, then at the desk, the reality of the offer grounding him. He nodded, his voice finding its strength. The sun had not yet crested the horizon when Ali reached the office door. He pushed the heavy brass key into the lock and stepped into the cool, silent space. His day began not with words, but with the weight of a bucket and the coarse texture of a scrub brush. He knelt on the hard floor, his knuckles white, as he scrubbed the mahogany planks until his reflection shimmered in the wood. Every movement was deliberate. He hauled heavy stacks of files from the delivery bay to the archives, his shoulders burning with the strain of the load. He organized the documents by date, then by department, his fingers moving with a rhythm born of necessity. By midday, his palms were raw and his breath came in short, sharp bursts. He did not stop. When a stack of papers threatened to topple, he caught it, his reflexes honed by years of dodging through market crowds. He filed, he polished, and he cleared the debris of the previous day. The office transformed under his hands. As the shadows lengthened, he stood back, his body aching, but the room was silent and ready. He had earned his place. When the office lights dimmed, Ali did not leave. He pulled a chair to the library shelves, his fingers tracing the spines of heavy, leather-bound volumes. He opened a ledger, the ink still smelling of fresh press. At first, the numbers blurred into a chaotic jumble. He held his head in his hands, forcing his eyes to track the columns of profit and loss. He compared the figures to the notes he had scribbled in his own pocketbook, searching for the patterns that governed the flow of trade. He spent hours deciphering the language of contracts, reading the same paragraph until the meaning locked into place. His jaw tightened as he encountered a complex clause regarding shipping routes. He grabbed a pen, mapping out the logic on a scrap of paper until the solution emerged. He was no longer just moving files. He was understanding the mechanics of the business. He practiced the rhythm of negotiation, whispering arguments to the empty room, testing the weight of his own voice. He learned to identify the leverage in a deal. By the time he blew out the lamp, his mind was no longer tethered to the market square. He had replaced his hunger for food with a hunger for knowledge. 5 years had passed, measured not in days but in the steady accumulation of skill and effort. Ali walked toward the glass-fronted building, his stride rhythmic and purposeful. The city noise muffled as he stepped into the lobby, where the air smelled of ozone and expensive paper. He moved past the reception desk, his presence drawing a nod from the staff who once would have looked right through him. He reached the heavy door at the end of the hall, the brass handle cool and solid under his palm. He pushed it open. The office was spacious, filled with the soft hum of cooling fans and the steady tick of a wall clock. He walked to the desk, his boots clicking against the polished stone floor. He placed his hands on the mahogany surface, feeling the grain beneath his fingertips. He sat in the high-back chair, the leather yielding to his weight. He was no longer the boy running from the shadows. He was the one who held the pen. Ali pulled a checkbook from the drawer. The paper was crisp, a sharp contrast to the tattered notes he once kept in his pockets. He uncapped his pen, the nib hovering over the line. He thought of his mother, her hands stained with soil, and his father shivering under a thin blanket. He began to write. The pen moved with steady, controlled pressure, filling in the numbers that would secure a home for them. He did not rush. He watched the ink settle into the fibers of the paper, a permanent mark of his success. He filled out a second check, this one for the medical specialists, who would finally address his father's failing health. The silence in the office was absolute, save for the rhythmic scratching of the nib. He signed his name at the bottom, the signature firm and legible. He folded the documents, sliding them into envelopes with deliberate care. He pressed the adhesive strips shut, the sound of the seal final and satisfying. He placed the envelopes on the corner of his desk, ready for the courier. The hunger that had driven him for years, the cold nights in the market, the fear of empty hands, it all culminated in these 2 small, heavy envelopes. He leaned back, his breath steady. The engine hummed as the car left the paved roads, tires crunching over the familiar gravel path toward the village. Ali gripped the steering wheel, watching the landscape shift from modern infrastructure back to the cracked mud walls he knew so well. He pulled to a stop at the edge of the market square. The air here was heavy with the scent of dust and ripening fruit. He stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into the uneven ground. A group of young boys stood near a row of wooden crates, their faces smudged with dirt as they shouted prices to passing travelers. Ali walked toward them. The boys fell silent, watching the stranger approach. He stopped before the oldest boy and looked at the bruised apples stacked in the crates. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of currency. He gestured to the entire display. He bought every single crate, clearing the stall in one motion. He handed the money to the boy, then reached into his bag to pull out extra coins, pressing them into the boy's palm. The boys stared at the sudden wealth, their eyes wide and disbelieving. The children gathered in a tight circle, their eyes fixed on the man who had just emptied their stall. Ali stood tall, his shadow falling across the same patch of earth where he had once wept over stolen coins. He did not look away. He scanned their faces, seeing the same hunger and the same uncertainty he had carried for years. He cleared his throat, the sound sharp against the quiet of the square. "Keep your head up," he said, his voice steady. He paused, letting the words settle. "Work until your hands are tired, and never take what is not yours." He pointed to the crates he had just purchased. "The path is long, but your integrity is the only thing that belongs to you." The boys stood motionless, the coins heavy in their pockets, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding. He had not just given them money, he had given them a standard. He saw the cycle finally begin to change. Ali turned away from the circle of children. He walked back toward the vehicle, his boots crunching rhythmically against the gravel. He did not look back at the market square. He reached the door, pulled the handle, and settled into the driver's seat. The engine ignited with a low, steady vibration that cut through the stillness of the village. He shifted into gear and pulled away, the tires kicking up a thin trail of dust that hung in the air behind him. The mud walls and the narrow paths receded in the rearview mirror, until they were nothing more than a blur against the horizon. He kept his hands firm on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The weight of his past remained, but it no longer held him in place. He drove toward the city, moving forward with the clarity of a man who had fulfilled his promise.